Hey everyone, welcome to our first Rapid Business Growth Show. I am actually delighted whoever is joining us today. And if you're not joining us at this moment, try to get this show will be recorded, so it will be sent to you. So make sure, you listen to it, because today what we are talking about is actually one of the biggest problems local businesses, especially service-based businesses, face. And that's around positioning. That's around who they are, because you don't want to be Apple among a lot of apples out there. You don't want to be a brown cow among all the brown cows out there, right? Because there is no differentiation. I give you an example. I have a friend, he's a realtor. He told me, Ali, if you're selling your condo, give that listing to me. And I said, hey, why should I give it to you? You're my friend, that's awesome. But I have 5 other options out there, right? So you have to differentiate. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with professional service providers, is that they're unable to differentiate themselves, position themselves differently, because there's 400 other dentists here. There is 500 local firms in the city. How can you differentiate, right? So to talk about this topic, I have a special guest today, because he knows about storytelling. He knows about positioning. So Adrian McIntyre, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ali. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So before I start, Adrian, I'm just going to give people a little bit of brief as to who you are. So when entrepreneurs, experts, and professional service providers want to get their stories straight, they call Dr. Adrian McIntyre. He's a cultural anthropologist and business storytelling consultant who has worked in over 30 countries, which is impressive, guys. Just immense experience. Adrian has been telling stories on stages and in the media since he was 5 years old. I was doing very different things when I was 5. He's advised and trained hundreds of clients on high-performance communication, business storytelling, and personal branding, PR, media, and presentation skills. So, first question with Adrian is, why storytelling is so much important, especially when it comes to the local service provider, let's say a lawyer, accountant, dentist, consultant. Why is it so important?
Well, for the simple reason, and you said it so nicely in the introduction, it is very, very difficult to differentiate ourselves at the level of the product or the service we provide. And the reason for that is really quite simple. If it's good, if it works, it's probably following some best practices that everyone else whose stuff works is also following. So we've heard for 50 years, you need a unique selling proposition and, tell the market how you're different. The reality of it is now that you need to tell people how you're different, because they want to do business with you and get a great service in the process. So storytelling is the single most potent and powerful way to differentiate yourself, because nobody has lived your stories. It is literally the only unique thing every human being has, and yet we're not using it to the extent we can to really connect with people and do business with them.
So very interesting point to bring in, right? So let's say we have a local plumber or local roofing guy listening to us, and he's like, well, I install roofs. How am I different? What kind of stories can I tell? So let's dig in deeper, and
Yes.
let's take an example of a person, how they can basically use that storytelling.
Can I give you an example from yesterday?
Absolutely. Yes, that'd be awesome.
My wife's Canadian, and so she and the kids are currently in Victoria, BC, visiting grandma, right? And I'm at home in Phoenix, Arizona. Mm-hmm. And because they're gone, we have one car. I'm able to get out much more around town because usually it's like wife and kid car, right? And I work from my home office or I fly somewhere to speak. So yesterday I went to 3 Chamber of Commerce meetings in different little areas around Phoenix. And first thing in the morning, 7 a.m., I'm in my local Chamber of Commerce. I've never been there before in my life. And they're doing 30-second commercials. So everybody stands up and says what they do. Now, the example comes from insurance industry. There was literally 3 people in a row from different companies who stood up and introduced themselves in 30 seconds. And the first one went, and she said her thing. And then the next guy got up and he said, well, I'm in insurance, ha ha ha, like everybody laughs. And he says, and we sell policies that are really good. I mean, he said it differently, and then the next guy gets up and he says, well, so I'm also in insurance, and what we do is we give personal attention. And of course, every one of them does the same thing at the level of the service. Then there was a woman who stood up, and she wasn't in insurance. She was in like financial services or something, right? I guess that's similar, but she was probably more on like the fund management and retirement aspect. She stands up and she says, "Hey, everybody, I'm Danny, and I'm new to this area. I just moved here from Oregon, where I grew up on a Christmas tree farm. And there wasn't another family for like 10 miles around us. And now I'm living here, and everyone's houses are so close that I'm really freaked out. But I'll tell you one thing I learned from growing up in that small town was that supporting local businesses is the most important thing. So I'm building my business here. I don't have any clients, and obviously I want to get some. But more importantly, I want everybody to come up and talk to me about what you do, because I want to be your biggest fan."
Okay.
Now, who do you think everybody was interested in talking more to? Danny.
Her story.
She told a story that connected, and they could like, wow, I love this girl. She's cool. Like she told them, I don't have any clients. I'm brand new here. But so she was willing to be real, and that's what works.
So is it like, it's a classic example, because good stories compel. They basically change people, right? The way we feel, the way we think,
Yes.
the way we act, and the way we behave, right? So it's very interesting that like how the storytelling influence impacts us. So right now, a lot of small businesses out there, Adrian, they're listening today, or they will be watching this video, and they'll be wondering, it's like, I'm struggling with this. Like, I go out, I'm doing my marketing, I'm getting my traffic, I'm at the local BNI chapter, a chamber event, I gave out 100 business cards, right? Yeah. So what kind of 1 or 2 or 3 action steps which I can take to be a better storyteller?
So first thing is understand, and this is really important because there's a lot of people talking about storytelling these days. Like, it's a very popular topic. And I never like to speak ill of anyone else in the space, because quite frankly, there's a huge need. But I will tell you one thing that a lot of people are saying, and I fundamentally think it's wrong. I disagree with this. So it's the idea that you should have one brand story, okay? And the idea is you should tell your story like as if it's going to be this one thing. That's not going to help you. And I'll tell you a little bit of an interesting fact about this. So the word brand, it comes from cowboy culture. When a brand was a physical thing, it was a mark, a fixed representation, and you would literally burn it into the flesh of the property of your business, right? These poor animals, yeah? Branding has carried that implicit concept forward. So when people hear the word brand, they think logo, right? They think specific colors. They think slogan, right? A one fixed thing that's supposed to represent your business. What you really want to do is humanize your business. So your brand should be comprised of a lot of stories, and not just the one, like that you practice in the mirror with a script or something. You should be able to talk about your business in many different ways, and everyone working in your company should be empowered to do the same thing. Practically, what does that mean? It means you got to use this thing that we all have to create content, and not formal, like polished content, but you've got to start storytelling around the work you do every day. You've got to show people, what you're doing. You've got to introduce them to the folks on your team and let them use their own thing. The lady in accounting, right? She should be able to make some cool Instagram posts if she wants to. And they don't have to get approved. They're not like, this is not formal, controlled kind of content. You want to show people the real you. Here's a corollary to that. If there's something that you don't want people to see, you better go fix that, okay? Because transparency is the new black, as we say sometimes, right? It's the most important thing. Everybody knows we do business with people we like, we know, we trust. How do we create that? We tell them stories that show who we are.
Okay.
And this is going to be counterintuitive. Show the flaws. So another example, 2 days ago, I was doing an interview on a podcast. I was being interviewed, and the audience for this podcast, you'll love this. Speaking of local business, the audience for this podcast were six-figure pet sitting companies. So dog walkers, dog sitters, cat people, like six-figure businesses in the pet care space. And the host shared an example. We were talking about the power of story, and she said, this thing just happened. One of the dog sitters in her community lost the dog she was being paid to watch, right? And you would think to myself, oh my God, like never admit that. Well, here's what she did. The story had a happy ending. 3 days later, she found the dog. But she made a post about this on her Facebook page that her clients see. And she told the whole story about, I was watching Fido or whatever the dog's name was. And then he was like, the door opened and he was gone. And I panicked because like the worst thing you can imagine is you're caring for someone's dog or child or anything, right? And you lose the animal. But she went through all the details. And in that process, you could see how committed she was. You could see her values. You could see the personal investment she had. And then she talked about everything she did, and she went door to door, and she went to she did everything. Finally, she found the dog. When she told that story, people loved it. They were like, oh my God, you're the kind of person I want to watch my dog. And it started with a mistake, like a huge error, a huge mistake. So the truth is the secret sauce in good stories. And I don't just mean it's a true story. I mean, you tell the thing that takes a little bit of courage to tell.
So you mentioned a very interesting thing that like things which takes a little bit of courage. I think every business, whatever they do during that 8 hours, they can translate that into a story. Yes. I mean, they saw 3 clients. This client had this kind of a problem. I walked him through this thing. This is what kind of solution we found. They don't even need to mention client's name. It could be client A had this problem with to me, right? Or, hey, you know what? I'm a roofing guy. Today our crew finished this $1 million plus property. Have we installed this cool roof there? So I think what you're saying that take that day-to-day stories from your business, right? Document them and basically start telling them through your phones, through your Instagram, through your Facebook Live, or few other different channels. So basically you can captivate the audience.
In person as well. I mean, these are exactly the kind of things, you should be sharing at networking meetings, because frankly, everyone in the room in a networking event is not your client. They are your community. And, I just met this woman, Danny, yesterday morning, but I promise you, if somebody says, hey, if I happen to hear somebody around here needs that kind of service, I'm going to say, you should go talk to this girl. She's really interesting. And, and she wasn't the most senior person in financial services in the room. She didn't have the biggest portfolio, et cetera. So another key thing of storytelling, Ali, that you just touched on is so critical. You've got to equip the people around you to tell your stories when you're not there. We all love to tell stories, okay? The problem is everybody wants referrals. Everybody wants clients to make referrals, customers to make referrals. Everybody wants business, peers in other industries to make referrals. But we've never thought about what they need in order to do that in a very natural way, right? They need to be able to tell interesting stories to other people about you when you're not there. In other words, Go ahead.
Exactly. The funny thing is it's a snowball effect. You tell someone a good story, then they go to the second person and say, hey, you know what? There's someone, he told me about this thing. That's so amazing, because you want to share about it. You want to talk about that. Right?
Yeah, that dog walker story that I heard, just 2 days ago, I've already told like 6 people about this, just because it's such a great example. So equip people around you to tell stories about your business. How do you do that? Well, the first, a lot of people will say, okay, fine, but I don't really know what to share. Like, what's too much? I don't want it to be too personal. And one thing I would say to that is this. It's not a question of if it's too personal. It's a question of whether it's too, self-absorbed, okay? Your stories are not really about you, even when it's a personal story. So if you can kind of wrap your head around this concept, it's your personal story. It's something that happened to you in your life, whether it was last week or when you were 5, right? But if you're telling it in a good way, people will identify with it. They're hearing themselves in your story. Or if you're telling a story about a job you did and there was a problem and you had to solve it, and the way you dealt with the client or the customer or the patient when you were doing that, they're imagining themselves being in that situation and appreciating being treated the way you treated that other person. So everyone hearing your story is mapping it in their own minds to themselves. If you know that, it stops being about you. Nobody really cares about us, to be honest with you. Like, let's get over that right away, right? But if you can tell stories in a way that have other people imagining the future and liking themselves in that picture, or remembering the past, their own past, and going, oh yeah, I mean, that's happened to me. I know what that's like. Wow, good for him for sharing that. That's really great. Then your story's not about you, it's about the listener, and that's magic.
That's magic then, right? Okay, so that totally makes sense, because what you're saying that a lot of blurb on social media, a lot of noise on social media, it's, hey, you know what? See who I am, what my company does.
Yeah.
This is like, what I do really well. But technically, people don't really give a shit about it. Bottom line is that they want to hear what you're saying, that stories, and they also want to hear stories which are technically, you are not the superstar in it, right? But rather there's a scenario there, right? Okay, and which makes them feel good about themselves.
Yes. There's another.
I think weight loss guys do it really, really well. With service professionals or gyms do it really, really well. Or service professionals can learn from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? There's another pitfall, okay, that I'll mention, because I've been seeing this happening. There was a huge discussion I was observing playing out in a Facebook comment thread about veteran-owned businesses. And here in the United States, there's a particular culture and relationship to the military and to veterans, and there's a whole set of conversations about that. I'm sure they happen in other countries as well, but there's probably some unique dynamics that are playing out here in 2017. Okay, but in any case, one of the things I noticed in the comments was there were people who wanted the label veteran owned to do a lot of work for them, like just the phrase. And other people were saying, it's not enough. I wouldn't buy from you just because this is a veteran-owned business. I mean, in principle, I want to support people who have served a country, who have suffered great personal loss, et cetera, but just being a veteran isn't enough. And that caused a lot of backlash, because people were like, how dare you say that? But actually, I think there was something really interesting playing out in that discussion. And here's what I realized. The only issue that I have with the veteran-owned label is the same issue I have with any shortcut. And that is, it's a little bit lazy. See, it's not about what it is to be a veteran, like in some general way. Just like I have a PhD, okay? I walk around saying, Dr. Adrian McIntyre all the time. But if I use that only as a shortcut and I let that try to do all the work for me, that doesn't impress people. In fact, I'm certain there are people that it turns off, right? It's if this specific veteran were to tell her own stories and connect, then people will be like, that's awesome. I love her. And, so you got to actually do the work. You can't hide behind the label or the slogan or whatever. Now, I will be honest, it's harder to fit a story on the side of a work truck where you can put such and such, veteran owned, like in that context, of course, that's a practicality, and you don't put the phone number on the van or whatever. Fine. That isn't what I mean. But I do mean when it comes to thinking about how you're going to communicate who you are, what you do, why you started, what you stand for, the things you've gone through along the way, some stuff that happened last week that reveals your values and the way you do your business. You've got to be telling those stories beyond the label, and that's where this stuff comes into play.
Okay, awesome. And one of the things which I add is people don't realize that About Us page on any website is the second most or third most visited page. So that tells people that what? People love to know who you are. What do you do? How do you do it? Which you are just saying it that go much more in depth and do better job at storytelling, right? So last parting piece of guidance that if a lot of people who will be, as I said, listening to it today or later on, if they want to have a takeaway from it, that they can become better at their own storytelling or for their own business, how, what is your parting piece of guidance for them?
Sure. So just on a very practical level, and I'll say this quickly, and then maybe we can type it up and put it in the comments or something. So you should understand that, although we could talk about story for a long time, there's 5 topics and 5 types that really matter. Okay, topics and types. So the topics are stories about people, stories about your product or service, stories about your process. Okay, people, process, product. You've probably heard that before. Stories about problems, and your stories about your promise. In other words, who you are, how you fix it, what people can expect, how you get them from their pain to the solution. Okay, people, process, product, problem, promise. Tell stories about all those things. You, the people in your business, your clients, et cetera, et cetera. You can unpack each of them. 5 types. Everybody should be focusing on creating these things and what I call informal storytelling. Okay, so these include photos. Photos are stories. Long form captions or text posts. Videos. 24-hour stories. What you have now on Instagram and on Snapchat and on Facebook. So a rotating cycle, 24-hour stories, which can be clips or photos, and then finally live streams. Those are the 5 types of stories you should be making and the 5 topics that you should be talking about.
Okay, awesome.
That was like a lot in a little space, but we'll type it up so that people can
I know
see.
there is 10 things you mentioned. You went super fast, and we can go into depth of each one of them. So before I let you go, right, Agent, would you say that if a local service provider, if they're focusing on, let's say, photos, or if they're focusing on live stream, they should focus on 1 or 2 things and they should do it really well? What's your take on this, then choosing 5 mediums over 1 medium?
Well, so yeah, I think there's not a single answer to that for everybody. It really depends on the business, on what you can show. Like, certain kinds of service work, the service itself is kind of invisible. So you'd have to talk around it. Maybe it's not good for Instagram, right? It just doesn't fit the visual medium. But maybe it's great to do kind of an after the job debrief where you just, you pick up the phone, you live stream, and you say, well, I'm just leaving it, et cetera, et cetera. So I think everyone has to kind of feel their way. I recommend try everything and see what you personally like the most. And if you have a team, you'll probably find that there are several people on the team who are already great at some of this stuff in their own personal life. They may have awesome personal Instagram, right? Like my wife is crushing it, whatever that means. With stuff about our kids and homeschooling and the activities they're doing. And so that, if I was, you have to kind of fine tune it for your own self, but find what works for you. If it's 1 thing, do 1 thing. If it's 3 things, do 3 things. Just do something.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
So do something and focus on what you really sits well with your personality, right? So Adrian, if people want to get in touch with you, they want to follow you, how they can do that?
Sure. I mean, everything is at the website, storyprofit.com. Story, Profit, because we turn your stories into money. Storyprofit.com. And we're doing some redesign there, so I don't know what you'll see exactly when you go there, but everything, that's the home place, and you can contact me through that page as well.
Awesome. So I will have that link in the comment section so you guys can go and visit. If you have any questions, write it down in the comment section. We will answer it to you, get back to you right on it. Bottom line is that you have to get better at your storytelling because you need to differentiate. You need to position differently because so much competition out there right now. And if you are just basically a journalist or come across as a journalist and no one can differentiate between you and your competitor and your local, whatever market you're competing in, local, national, international, right? You need to differentiate. And I think Adrian put it really nicely. All the 5 types and 5 stories are in the comment section. So go and take a look at it. Adrian, thank you so much for joining us today to Rapid Growth Business Show.
You're very welcome. It was fun. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. We'll get you next Friday, right at noon. So get your lunch a little bit early and have join us because we have another interesting guest talking about exactly marketing, right? So take care. Have an awesome weekend. Bye-bye.